We're just a month away from Black Myth Wukong releasing worldwide for the PS5 and PC, and while this game is being praised left and right for its stunning visuals, stylish gameplay, epic boss encounters, and its gorgeous take on the legendary novel Journey to the West, a new detail emerged regarding a boss mechanic that has some fans a bit perplexed. We'll cover that along with examining the game's level design in Black Myth Wukong, an aspect of the game that has very little coverage so far. If you are interested in playing this game, consider entering into my Deluxe Edition giveaway available to everyone, so head over to the description to find the details on how to enter. Alright, so the developers of Black Myth Wukong, GermanStrands, have done a terrific job at showcasing this game's boss fights and combat mechanics, but there is a new detail that was picked up by a PlayStation insider over on X at GermanStrands that indicates that some bosses may have a trick up their sleeves should players make quick work of these encounters. According to GermanStrands, certain bosses in the game will only enter their second phase if the player manages to defeat the boss within a certain time frame. In other words, a secret, seemingly optional encounter with the same boss can be initiated should the player demonstrate a level of skill where the boss is defeated in a quick manner. Whether players will be given this kind of information mid-fight to let them know how swiftly they would need to defeat the boss to initiate these optional second phases is something that I don't have information on. I'm certainly thinking these time thresholds are left purposely vague to surprise players, but that's all the info we have about this particular mechanic at this time. Definitely an interesting system, and some players are understandably a little perplexed by it, as normally boss fights and other action games that employ multiple phases happen seamlessly either mid-fight once the boss's health reaches a certain threshold, or a cutscene will play out mid-health bar to indicate the transition to the next phase of the encounter. I've never quite seen any other game do something like this where it provides players an optional, additional challenge to a fight if they happen to make quick work of a boss, so I am incredibly intrigued by it and its implications, so definitely let me know your thoughts on this mechanic and whether you like it or not. Man, like I said earlier, I just can't think of a game that has employed a mechanic like this, so while I think it's honestly really cool to offer skilled players an extended challenge with a boss encounter that features more aggressive attacks and such like a multiple phased boss typically would, I'm also thinking that this could be easily exploited. I mean that in order to avoid further challenge, players can just kind of slowly whittle away at the boss's health bar to prevent the second phase in order to avoid further challenge, right? I'm just really curious to see what time parameters need to be met to engage the second phase, as I'm sure the developers are trying to give particularly skilled players more of a challenge while allowing players not accustomed to these kinds of action RPGs a level of approachability by not forcing a second phase if the player defeats the boss in the anticipated duration. I hope that makes sense. I guess what I'm trying to say is this is GermanStrands' way to cater to both skilled players looking for a greater challenge by extending boss encounters, while also catering to the average player who may not want that additional challenge, and I think that's pretty freaking awesome. While I obviously haven't yet played the game, I have looked for press coverage of those who managed to play the 2.5-hour demo from Summer Game Fest, and one article from VG247 might have made mention of this unique aspect from their recent article. In VG247's article, Black Myth Wukong may not be a Souls-like, but there are still plenty of Miyazaki moments, don't worry, written by Dom Pepiot. Hope I got the name right. The author discusses numerous aspects of Black Myth Wukong where the game is both similar to and deviates from FromSoft's Soulsborne titles, making particular mention of design elements like the second phase boss encounters. While it is still very unclear if this particular boss fight he mentions is a scripted second phase or an optional one for being speedy, this is what Dom from VG247 had to say about areas in which Black Myth subverts expectations. Design choices like unassuming bosses that fall with a fair amount of ease, but then spring back to life in a new form and with a whole new health bar. They sucker punch you into a false sense of security, then take advantage of your dented life bar and kill you as you try to suck the last remaining charge from your definitely not an Estus flask. As I mentioned here, it's impossible to tell whether or not this example from VG247 is a mandatory two-phase boss, or if this may be one of the encounters where an optional second phase ensues upon defeating the boss quickly. But it definitely sounds like players will have a fair share of surprises with the boss fights in this game, whether they are secret or not. In case there are some bosses that do feature these optional second phases, it would be awesome if players were awarded for their impressive speeds, potentially with more experience points, maybe some cosmetics and the like to incentivize players to return to these fights in New Game Plus, or consequent playthroughs to conquer all the challenges that may be on offer. While we don't have any concrete details about a potential increase to will, this game's equivalent to experience points, or loot drops for completing these extra phases, it would be a great thing for game science to showcase more of, which would help in greater distinguishing this game from other action role-playing titles. There's a lot to be said regarding this feature, so share away your thoughts in the comments, as I'd love to hear your take on these potential optional encounters. In line with what the developers should be showcasing more of, we have to talk about level design. In my previous video, we discussed the growing sentiment from both those in the media and from fans, making comments that Black Myth Wukong appears to be a boss rush, with insiders backing that up, claiming that the title features more than 80 boss fights. This was further exacerbated by the 2.5-hour demo showcasing very little of the actual levels themselves, and instead primarily focused on the boss fights. As such, we know very little about the level design in the game, other than the fact that levels most certainly exist, and that Game Science has publicly stated that the game is not an open world game, and instead features many linear levels, with some levels being a bit larger that lay host to optional boss fights, NPCs that offer quests, secret areas, and the like. While I don't have much of an issue if the game prioritizes boss fights over the levels that connect these fights, this has understandably become an issue for some, as many prospective fans are interested in knowing what may lie behind these boss encounters. What is out there, outside the bosses, that will hook players other than the core narrative and the awesome visuals, right? I get it, for sure. It seems like we are being shown all this awesome stuff with boss fights and impressive visuals and such, but we know very little about what happens between these fights, and this is an area where game science should showcase more of. Well, let's go back to that same VG247 article we referenced earlier, as the author, perhaps more thoroughly than any of the other articles out there, goes into some aspects of the level design that showcases aspects of the game that take place outside of the game's gameplay and boss encounters. Author Dom, when describing some similarities the title has with the Soulsborne series, reports, "There's the poison swamp. Yes, sorry to tell you, but there's a poison swamp. My demo was from the early game, perhaps 4 or 5 hours in, I think, and already the game starts throwing status afflictions at you, and of course, one comes in the form of a horrible stinky bog that saps your health. It's implemented well, a warning zone if you get bullied out of a safe combat area that'll chip your health unless you can scavenge herbs to heal your malaise." He continues with, "It's not just plopped in for the sake of it. It fits the world, plasters another level of wariness as you navigate the fairly linear level." So, while it's not much, we can glean that 1. There is hazardous terrain within the levels of Black Myth Wukong that poses a threat to traversal and lays host to a number of dangers within. 2. There are herbs that you can scavenge in the game that can relieve the player of status afflictions. And 3, that this was reportedly from a section early in the game, perhaps 4 or 5 hours in, alluding to a runtime that may actually be quite meaty from start to finish. Dom further adds, "And if you survive the swamp, you'll find some interactable items that you think, ah, cool, these will help me heal and recover the health I lost to poison. Nah, they're mimics. Get tricked, idiot." Definitely cool to see enemies like mimics be present here in Black Myth, of which we actually have a clip here on screen showcasing one, but I think the article does a pretty good job of showcasing the brief time the author had with the game, hinting at both the boss fight elements we talked about earlier, as well as the overall feel of the title. So, Black Myth Wukong is not a Souls-like. Good, says Dom. It's more of a boss rush, something that, to me, feels like a game at the intersection of Ninja Gaiden and Nioh than it does Dark Souls and Bloodborne. He continues with, "There are mega bosses tucked away in the margins. More on that in another article. And pay particular importance here, and there is challenge for you if you want to pursue it. But the gooey center of the game is a sweet, well-balanced boss rush, padded out with gorgeous levels that teach you the intricacies of its acrobatic combat." I'm particularly interested in the "there is challenge for you if you want to pursue it," as this may allude to the optional, more challenging second phases of some bosses, and gorgeous levels that teach you the intricacies of its acrobatic combat, as these levels are, according to the developers, a big part of Black Myth Wukong. While it seems primarily to be focused on boss fights, it's great to hear a journalist reflect more on what happens outside of these encounters, alluding to quite a massive game world that we will be able to test our combat skills in, even though the main highlight may be the game's story and the impressive number and quality of boss encounters. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to learn more about Black Myth Wukong's level design as we rapidly approach the game's release date in August, and be sure to check out that giveaway and watch this video going over the insane leaks regarding the huge amount of content that may be in the game. That's all I got for you. Thanks for your awesome support, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.